Hey everyone, thanks for joining again. This is Dennis. Today we're going to talk about one of my oldest digital cameras, the Nikon Coolpix A. A great little camera and a very reasonable alternative to the Ricoh GR. I got this camera about 2 years after it came out in 2013, so it's just about 10 years old now. It's the same age as the original Ricoh GR, not the GR3, which you can buy today. As you can see, it's very compact, very stylish camera. I really like how it looks. I think it's actually nicer looking than the Ricohs. There's also a silver version out there, which is super stylish, but probably kind of indiscreet and impractical. Anyway, it's a very well built, very compact, and it has quite good image quality. It has a lot of the characteristics I generally like in compact cameras. The lightweight and the low profile, the fact there's no lens cap that you need to remove or forget, and yet it's still an APS-C camera with 16 megapixels, so that's a pretty decent amount of image quality. Particularly in good light, you can get very sharp, very natural looking images with it. And I do think this is a more serious camera than some of the others that I've used and reviewed on this channel, like the NX Mini. But on the other hand, it's not necessarily as fun as that camera. Okay, so let me walk you through some of the specs of the camera. It is a compact point and shoot, fixed lens style camera. It has a 28mm lens and a 16 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor, and it was released in 2013. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the body. First thing you can see is it's very compact and extremely solid and well built. This is a metal chassis made of magnesium and aluminum. It feels completely solid. There's no big grip, but there's a small grip on the front and a rubber pad on the back, and I don't find it difficult to hold. The screen is fixed and has a decent resolution. The lens doesn't zoom. It's a 28mm equivalent prime lens. The camera has a leaf shutter, which is also very quiet. Autofocus is okay, but it's not speedy. It has a dedicated macro mode. There's a built-in flash, and there's a hot shoe. It's also worth mentioning this camera does not have USB charging, and the Nikon branded charger that comes with it is kind of ridiculously almost as big as the camera itself. A few thoughts about the 28mm focal length and the lens in general. It has an f2.8 aperture, and it's very sharp, even wide open. But 28mm is not my preferred focal length. That's why I don't actually use this camera all that often. There are certainly situations where 28mm is the right focal length, but for me, it's usually on the wide side. I prefer a 35 or a 50mm as my standard lens. That's why if I ever decide to get a Ricoh GR, I would go for the GR3X, which is 40mm. Another thing worth pointing out is this camera uses a leaf shutter instead of a focal plane shutter. One advantage of that is that the shutter activation is very quiet. It's just a subtle click. A second benefit is that a leaf shutter camera can work with flash at any shutter speed, which can be very convenient. You won't get that in a DSLR type camera. In good light, the images are very sharp, and I find the colors somewhat film-like. There's plenty of detail, but do be careful not to blow out the highlights in the skies and windows in high contrast scenes. You can recover a certain amount in RAW, but it's better if you get the exposure right in camera. Here are a few more photos that I've taken with the camera over the years. Okay. For anyone thinking about using the Coolpix A as a video camera, just don't. Not only is the video quality very poor, even finding where the stupid movie mode is super weird and difficult. The one time I tried to use it on a video project, I got the footage back and realized it was worse than my phone could capture. So yeah, don't shoot video on this camera. Okay, so how does the Nikon Coolpix A compare to some of the other cameras out there? Specifically, people probably want to know how this compares to a Ricoh GR, and this camera is almost identical in specs and form factor to the original Ricoh GR Mark I, but compared to the Ricoh GR3, it's a little bigger and it has a lower resolution. The Coolpix A is 16 megapixels and the GR3 is 24. I don't think that's actually a big deal, really, but what I do think is a bigger deal is that GR3 has image stabilization, and I do think IBIS on any camera is a big deal and really might help out in low light more than a higher max ISO will. On the other hand, I wouldn't pay $1,000 or however much the GR3 is going for right now just to have a slightly better version of the camera I already own. I think most of the time, this camera is still good enough, and if I was going to get a Ricoh GR type camera, I would get the GR3X instead, which has a longer 40mm focal length. That way, I'd have two different cameras effectively instead of two versions of the same camera. Compared to some of the other small cameras I've talked about on this channel, the Coolpix A is one of the thinnest in your bag because of the retracting lens, and has the largest sensor size of all my compacts. But the fixed lens is kind of limiting, and the screen doesn't flip or articulate. You can't charge it over USB, and it has no image stabilization, plus the autofocus is not that fast. So those are some of the reasons that this isn't the main camera that I use. It's not strictly a matter of image quality alone. The performance and usability of the camera also factors into that. Okay, so would I recommend a Nikon Coolpix A to somebody in 2023? And should you pick this up as an alternative to a Ricoh GR? That would depend a lot on price. When I picked this up about 2 years after it was released, I was able to pick up a used copy for like $300 US. And I know the Ricoh GRs are very expensive and even just hard to find these days in stock sometimes. But when I looked at prices recently for the Coolpix A, they also seem to have gotten pretty expensive. So for $700 or whatever it's going for, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you're able to find it for $300 or $400, I think it could still be a reasonable choice. It's still a great compact camera that's very usable today. I just wouldn't recommend you pay ridiculously inflated prices for it. All right, so those were my thoughts on the Nikon Coolpix A. I would love to hear your thoughts, so please, leave those in the comments. And once again, thanks for watching the video. Do be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out. And thanks again, and have a wonderful day. Okay, bye-bye.